still. All right, this will be the meeting of the Audits and Governmental Efficiency Committee, special meeting. April 12th, Councilmember Zine, the new chair. And my colleague, Mr. Parks, is in another committee, and Mr. Smith is tied up. So it's going to be a committee of one. And we have number 1 and 2 on the agenda. Number 1's not here yet. So we will hold number 1. And we will then go to number 2. If you'll please read that item.
Certainly. Item number 2 is a motion, Zine, Weston, Garcetti, relative to requesting the Controller, Office of Finance, and City Attorney to report on parking occupancy tax collections, including the current audit and pending and ongoing litigation concerning uncollected parking occupancy tax revenue.
Okay. We did have a news conference this morning on this matter with good turnout from the media, with our Controller, Wendy Gruhl, and our City Attorney, Carmen Chutanich, representatives from the City Attorney's Office, the Finance Department, so it was unveiling of some of the issues. So the city's facing a $350 million deficit starting July 1st. We need to become more fiscally responsible to protect our core city services. The city currently has a significant amount of uncollected debt. Considerable portion of that can be attributed to parking lot operators not remitting the city's parking occupancy tax. And there is a parking tax that's been in place a number of years. And since it's a cash business, many parking lot operators are keeping the money and not turning into the city what is owed the city. So we need to become more vigilant collecting what is owed to the citizens of Los Angeles, especially in situations like the parking occupancy tax, which they are paying to park in the city of Los Angeles. Since 2008, there's been approximately $23 million in parking occupancy tax revenues which have not been collected and is in active litigation with our City Attorney's Office. $23 million represents approximately 230 police officers on the streets of LA, 230 firefighters, and over 77 miles of street resurfacing. According to the Office of Finance, 9 of the city's top debtors are parking lot operators, and this abuse has been going on too long, and we're going to bring it to a stop. As newly appointed chair of Audits and Governmental Efficiency, I feel there is an immediate need to look at the process and how to better collect the money owed to the city. I have introduced some motions on this, and we are here today to discuss those motions. And the parking business is predominantly a cash business. Transient method of operation employed by many parking lot operators allows for constant fraud and abuse of the city policy. Noncompliance with the city parking tax occupancy creates an uneven playing field for the tax scaffolds and places conforming operators at a competitive disadvantage. So as the new chair of this committee, I'm going to allow the resources of the city to eliminate that fraud and abuse. I look forward to working with my colleagues to make this happen. Representatives from Police Commissioner here, Finance, City Attorney, Controller, we all are here to discuss this. So if I can get the current motion recommends that the City Controller report to AEG Committee update on the pending audit, along with timeline for completion, and the Office of Finance to report to this committee relative its contact with the outside contractor, the parking network, setting forth the contract scope of work and analysis of effectiveness in assisting city efforts in collecting the revenues, and the city attorney to report to this committee on litigation relative to outstanding money owed to the city. We will also make some amendments. So we're going to start with the police department that issues the permits. Police department issues the permits, controller collects the taxes, the controller's office, and the city attorney's office. And what I've seen happen in the past is someone owes a lot of money, millions of dollars, and somehow they haven't paid, and then they come up with some kind of a settlement. Instead of paying $2 million, which they owe, they settle for a lower value, which I think is absurd, and we're not going to continue that particular attitude. So, Mr. T. Frank, Executive Director of the Police Commission, your department issues the permits.
Yes, sir.
And when permits are issued, you have no idea if they're delinquent or not.
That's correct. Although, let me give you just a very brief overview of the process. We'll take an individual that wants to, for the first time, receive a auto park permit. They will come to Commission Investigation Division, fill out the appropriate application and the process that is outlined within the Los Angeles Municipal Code. At that time, our staff will accept the application. There's a requirement for incorporation documents, documents as to the relationship with the owner of the land. Do they have a lease? Are they the owner of the land, et cetera? Requirement for fingerprinting that takes place of the principals of the firm, et cetera. We currently will then check with the Office of Finance to see if that individual has any other auto parks that they owed monies to. Most of the new operators will not owe money at that point in time when we ask that question. We then go through a process. We recommend to the Police Permit Review Panel that they be issued an auto park permit, and they then get into business. If an individual is operating an auto park that comes to our attention without a police commission permit, and those occur in two ways. One would be we're notified by the Office of Finance that their field staff during their routine field inspections have identified a lot that they've determined to not have a valid permit. They will notify us, and or our officers who do random enforcement inspection throughout the city will make those observations themselves. We do have a complete listing of permits. We have them by within the LAPD jargon reporting district, so we know where they are, et cetera, and our officers will go out. And last year we did approximately 1,200 parking lot inspections over the year.
How many are there? How many lots?
About 1,700 would be an approximate number, sir. That number is always in flux because there are operators that go in and out of business, but approximately 1,700 lots in the city. So we will do those inspections, and if we go out and find an operator is operating without a permit, typically the individual who is the receipt of the monies that is not going to be at that lot. They'll have an individual they've employed. If there's no permit, we will take and place that person into custody for violation of the LAMC. If they have valid identification, and if the officers believe it's appropriate, they'll do a release from custody in the field. If not, they will take the person and book and then release them at that point in time. We will seize the funds from that particular lot and attempt to find out from the individual that we take into custody who they're working for, so we can ultimately locate the owner or the person who is operating that lot to, one, get them into compliance if they want to operate a auto park facility within the city. And that inspection would continue on. We would go back periodically to ensure that that lot is not in operation. I know from a prior conversation, you had asked, there's some way to block the lot, barricade it so it could not be used again. I've had a very brief conversation with Police General Counsel, and the concern they have is that land belongs to that individual, and if we cannot block ingress and egress to that land that is under their control, if they wanted to use it for something other than an auto park, they wanted to park cars on it for free and not charge, et cetera. So we'll have ongoing discussions about the feasibility of doing that, but the current information as of yesterday, which was a very brief conversation, that's what I learned. So that's the process we go through. There's also a process that the Commission is involved in. If an individual who is an auto park permit holder has a debt to the city, and I'm sure the Office of Finance can address the process that they go through, ultimately to send a case with an affidavit requesting revocation of the permit because of lack of payment of fees. That then goes before our Board of Police Permit Review Panel, and the panel then will hear that case and revoke the permit. We have had about 16 of those cases that has come to the panel in the last year and a half or so. Now, those are only for lots that have a permit that we can revoke. If you're a non-permitted lot, obviously that process would not apply to you. So that permit is revoked, and then upon the revocation of the permit, that applicant cannot operate that lot any longer. Unfortunately, what occurs in a number of these cases is an individual have a tax liability under Company A, reorganize under Company B, apply for a permit that Company B does not have any liability with the city, obtain a lease arrangement with a lot and begin operation in the lot, and then keep that lot current. So we see that frequently also. We have a process now that we utilize a master parking lot permit. And as lots are coming up for renewal of their annual permits, there are a number of companies that have multitude of lots. Prior to creating the master permit process, if I had 50 lots, each one of those lots would have had to have a complete new application process. So I want to now get lot 51, and I'm a reputable operator. I have to come in with all my articles of incorporation, get all of my executives, my board of directors fingerprinted. Very laborious and not business friendly. We created the master permit process. ABC company gets the master permit, and they want to add a lot. All they have to bring in is their leasing agreement, their liability coverage for that lot, and they're able to go in operation immediately. So that's become much more customer friendly. Again, as we're transitioning these 1,200 lots, a number of them are in that process. We have transitioned some to that process, but not all lots have transitioned to that because we just started it about a year ago. That's a very brief overview of where we are. I'd be happy to answer any questions if I didn't respond to you appropriately.
No, you did. And the concern is, while we have these 1,700 lots, that some are licensed, some aren't. Many of them are complying with the rules, sending the dollars in like they should. How often are they supposed to send in that the tax?
I would defer that to the Office of Finance, but I believe it's every 30 days, but I'm not certain about that, sir.
Okay. And we know it's a cash business, so the problem with the cash business is oftentimes they reuse the same ticket. They reuse the ticket on a car, and then you leave, they take that ticket back and get another car. So it's a cash business. I know they've done some audits by the Department of Finance, but the question is, like when you go and buy gasoline and you use your credit card, they can tell how much is being used, how much gas is being consumed. I mean, there's a documentation. This oftentimes there's never a receipt. You go and you pay your $5, $10, whatever it is, there's never a receipt. So you take off and somehow the money seems to disappear. So the dollars we're looking at, 23 million, could be more.
Some lots obviously do give receipts, some lots do not. Some put a window chit on you, some do not. Again, it's their operation. To the best of my knowledge, and again, I would have to defer to Office of Finance, we don't require a ticketing process within the city of Los Angeles. So.
That's just another thing that we could look at too. And what about bonding? Is there any bonding requirement for the permit with the police commission?
We only require a liability bond. We do not require a bond for anything else. Liability bond for any damage to your vehicle, et cetera.
So the people who don't pay, does the department go after them in any sense, or is it up to city attorney and finance and other elements of government?
The only effort we can make to those individuals is when the Office of Finance completes that audit process, puts together the case, and gives it to us. We put it before the police permit review panel, and the panel then would revoke. We are not the tax collector. Our only authority is over the permit and the regulation of that permit. So we would go after an individual who is operating without a permit, or if they have a permit and they are indebted to the city, and the Office of Finance has completed their administrative process, bring those cases to us, and then we would put them before the panel for revocation.
Now, what about changing names of the lot, changing family members?
Again, if we get a new application, if you have a lot that is in debt to the city, and a new operator comes in, they would have to have their articles of incorporation and all that information. Clearly, they're going to come in with a different structure than the structure that owes city monies, and we have to deal with that new corporate entity as a new entity, because none of the individuals that are going to be on the liability debt are going to be in the new corporate entity.
So we need to plug that particular situation.
I would defer that to the city attorney. That's a legal question if we can even do that.
And we identify them by address. How are the lots identified?
We identify them by address, yes, sir.
So if they have a lot at 500, we would be able to pull that address 500 and find out, or is it under the names?
They're cross-referenced. We have them under names. We have them under addresses. We have a very robust database of that information with the help of Office of Finance that we have created. And our officers, who are the inspectors in the field and go out and do the enforcement action, they've developed quite a system of their own as to who the reputable operators are and those lots that they have to continue to watch because of turnover.
And the renewal, that's done by the police commission?
The renewals, the process for renewals, as with all police commission permits, the renewal is mailed out to the individual November 1 of the preceding year. So for the renewals for 2012 will go out November 1. They are automatically sent out by the Office of Finance. We are not involved in the process of renewal. The assumption is that If you have a permit, it will remain valid. The renewal will go out, you'll pay your fee, and you get your new permit.
But the renewal goes out even if you haven't paid your fee.
Currently, that is a process. Again, we've had discussions with Office of Finance, Mr. Cabrera, and his staff about creating a system where, working with the Office of Finance, who generates that permit, that they could check their files. If there's a liability that that taxpayer owes, that they would take some action to not have that renewal go out to the taxpayer. The difficulty there is, again, you're always dealing with a 30-day sliding scale here, so I think that becomes something that would have to be looked at as to a time frame of how much of the delinquency has to be in a process. But clearly, we're all we can do to work with the Office of Finance on an enforcement posture, ensuring that we're doing our job as best we can to ensure that people are paying, and if they are non-permitted, to do the enforcement. I think in the last couple of years, again, with the partnership with Office of Finance, we have picked up the pace on that. A lot of the debt you're seeing now that you spoke of earlier is older debt. It's not debt that has occurred in the last year or two under our newer processing.
Okay, and what about valet parking?
Valet parking is not regulated in the city of Los Angeles currently. About 2.5 years ago, working with Councilmember Garcetti's office, a motion was introduced. Worked with the CLA's office on that. CLA produced a report. It went through Public Safety Committee. Committee then directed the city attorney to prepare an ordinance. My information at the current time is the city attorney's office is working on that ordinance to get it prepared and ultimately bring it forward. But currently there is no regulation of valets, and our effort was only to regulate on-street valet, not off-street valet. On-street valet is more problematic than off-street valet. Off-street valet meaning at the parking garages, hotels, et cetera. On-street meaning you pull to the curb, valet takes your car from there.
And are rules that say on a valet that you must park it in a private lot, you can't park it on the street? Are there any rules governing that?
Currently there are none because there's no ordinance regulating valets.
So
that would be part of what we would want included in the ordinance.
Looks like valets is a huge gap right now.
Currently it is, yes, sir. It's a gap from a safety perspective, public safety perspective. Who you giving your car keys to? Is that individual a licensed driver? Are they a past burglar, an auto thief, et cetera? And also, where are they parking their cars? We know from some surveillance that we did early on when we were looking at creating a valet ordinance. Our officers went out, did some nighttime enforcement, observed that a valet would pick up a car at a curb, drive it a couple of blocks, park it in a residential area, park it in a red zone. You're the innocent customer. You've paid your $20. You come out of the restaurant. You give your chit to get your car back. The valet goes down and gets your car, and it's in a red zone. They take the ticket that you got, crumble it up, throw it on the ground, bring your car back. The only thing you know is in a couple of months you get a citation from the city of Los Angeles for parking your car somewhere. So those are the issues that we're dealing with. Again, this is not to suggest that valet companies are not reputable. It is to suggest only that we have no regulatory scheme currently to regulate valets.
Well, I know that when I was going to college, I valet parked for a club called PJ's at Sunset, Santa Monica and Crescent Heights, and they never checked anything. You just get in their car and drive it, and that was it.
Right.
And I also know personal experience that I valet parked one day, and a couple months later I got a parking ticket in the mail, and I remember exactly where I was. They parked it in an expired zone, got a ticket, threw the ticket away, I get my car, and lo and behold. Right. So, and then you go to try and figure out how did that happen. Well, obviously they park it because they're not going to tell you got a ticket after they valeted your car.
Right.
So people get victimized by that. So the valet is a huge issue that we have to also address. I'm joined by my colleague, Councilmember Bernard Parks, who came in from another committee. Thank you. We're on item number 2 on the parking situation.
Another piece of that, sir, is the slippage in POT, parking occupancy tax, that occurs because if a valet parks that car and they're just putting the money in their pocket, then they're not paying the city the 10% of the valet parking or parking tax. They might have an arrangement with a parking lot operator, and they pay the operator, and the operator pays the tax. Those are the kinds of things that we wanted the valet ordinance to tighten up on.
Well, there's an ordinance that was proposed back in 2009.
That's the ordinance I'm speaking to, sir.
And directed the city attorney to do something with it. Recommended the council request city attorney prepare an ordinance to establish a valet parking permit program as recommended by the CLA.
Right.
Anyone here can discuss that? we need to figure that out too. But they did have a request back in '09.
Yes, sir, and the last information I have is that is still with the city attorney's office, and they're currently working on it.
Paul?
Mr. Chairman, Paul Smith, CLI. We'll go back and look at where the status of that is and talk to the city attorney that's involved with the preparation of the ordinance.
Yeah, we need, it's been since '09, November, adopted December 16th, '09. We're now in 11, April 11. I mean, it seems like sufficient time. So if we can get a status update on that back to this committee for our next committee meeting on the status of the file number 09-0206 from Public Safety Committee regarding the valet parking ordinance, which would regulate valet parking in the city of Los Angeles. But you're right, there may be a lot of money that we can collect that we're not collecting. And it's a nice report, but obviously nothing has been done with it. Okay. So how about Office of Finance, Mr. Ed Cabrera, Assistant Director.
Yes, sir. To just give a brief overview of what the process is, parking lot operators are subject to the city's business tax as well as the parking occupancy tax. Some of the statements that you made with regards to the type of operation of the businesses being transient in nature, some of the businesses open and close or change their structure. Other businesses operate at evening hours, in particular valet parking operators, where they will set up a location on a sidewalk and they'll either use on-street parking, or often some valet parking operators will commandeer other lots or other vacant space that they do not have any type of lease or agreement to use, and they will park cars there. The cash basis nature of the industry, we have found, as well as our contractor, the Parking Network, indicates that internal controls in terms of documenting the receipts of these parking lot operators often cannot be relied upon. We have staff that conduct audits of the parking lot operators. Our contractor, the Parking Network, also does they also conduct audits. They do discovery work for the Office of Finance. They will do on-site observations and car counting to ensure that the financial records that are provided to us during the course of an audit can be relied upon and are accurate. One of the problems that we have, as well as the Parking Network has, is oftentimes we encounter a lack of cooperation, a lack of record keeping that can be provided to us. The other issues that have come before this committee, as Mr. Tiefank has indicated, there is the police permit process. The Office of Finance has worked in a collaborative manner with both city attorney and the Commission Investigation Division over the years. Through those efforts, we were able to have an ordinance passed that allows for the revocation of police permits for those parking lot operators that are determined to be delinquent. The Office of Finance has also worked with CID and the city attorney to establish a strike force where we do look at these monthly remittances on a much more earlier basis to ensure that we are moving cases forward either for revocation or for closure, as well as filing a litigation with the city attorney's office. We have been in discussions with CID as well as city attorney with various proposals that Office of Finance has recommended, and we certainly can speak to those recommendations.
Okay. Would you say 99% of it's cash business in the parking lots?
I don't know if that's percent, but I would argue that a vast majority of the parking lot operators do have a cash basis.
And is there any requirement when someone comes into the lot that they have to give them a tag or where do they have to give them any kind of document, any kind of paper, any kind of receipt? Do they have to? Is there any requirement to give them anything, or can they just give me my $10 and we'll park your car?
I would defer that to Mr. Tiefank. The one note that I must state is that the Office of Finance is a tax administration agency. We do not have regulatory power in terms of dictating or instructing how a business can or cannot conduct their business activities, which is why we do work in close operation with CID, which is the regulatory agency. So I would defer that question to Mr. Tiefank.
Is there any requirement?
As I stated earlier, to the best of my knowledge, there is not. I believe there are a number of lots that I personally have used where they do give you a receipt. You know, you drive out through the cash window, they'll give you a receipt from a cash register.
I'm talking when you park.
I understand that, sir.
Put a little tag on your car, and because what I've seen them do is I've seen them take that
Right.
tag off your car, and then they reuse it.
To the best of my knowledge, there's no regulatory requirement under the police permit that occur.
And if there would be, it would come under the police permit then.
I would assume that would be a requirement of the permit. It could be, but to the best of my knowledge, it is not.
It's not okay.
Councilmember, if I may, I would agree with you. The feedback that we have from the parking network, our contractor, does indicate that there are a number of parking lot operators that do employ that practice, where if they do have a ticketing mechanism, oftentimes, though the record keeping is not accurate, oftentimes there is no true sequence in terms of issuance of those tickets. So I would concur with your statement.
I've been told that by people who are in the know. And are the taxes paid monthly, quarterly, or yearly? How do they pay the tax?
It is a monthly tax. The tax is required to be remitted on a monthly basis. The Office of Finance recently enacted a policy change where parking lot operators now have the ability to file their monthly remittance and pay online. So we enacted that with the hopes that this will provide some ability to control and address the issue, and also make it easier for those operators to comply.
And those are the legitimate operators, I would assume.
That would be applicable to the legitimate operators as well as the operators that are not in compliance.
And as far as cheating us on the tax, obviously they're collecting it when they collect that fee when the people enter the lot. They're collecting that money that's due us. How often have we ever done any analysis to see how often they'll give us a little bit, but not what they really owe us?
Well, the Office of Finance, as I indicated, we do conduct audits using both our own internal tax auditors as well as the parking network. So we do go out and conduct audits on a very frequent basis to ensure that those operators that we have identified as underreporting are reporting accurately. If they're not, we do issue assessments for additional tax liabilities. We also will have our automated LA tax system generate monthly tax bills and tax assessments for those taxpayers who fail to file their monthly remittance on a timely basis. So we're issuing assessments of tax for both audit engagements that we conduct as well as to those taxpayers that fail to report their monthly renewal.
And what type of compliance do we get with that?
With some taxpayers, we get compliance. Of course, taxpayers are allowed to, they do have a due diligence process where they have an administrative appeal process. It's a two-step hearing process before an assessment review officer and a second step before a board review. So in order for an assessment to become final and for the hearing process to be exhausted, the taxpayers do have that right to go through that process. Once that process is completed, the assessment is final. If a taxpayer remains delinquent, then we will refer those cases to CID for revocation of the police permit.
And will you issue a renewal if they're delinquent?
Currently, right now, the Office of Finance is the middleman. We issue the renewals and collect the police permit fees on behalf of the Commission Investigation Division. We do not have the authority to deny a renewal or to refuse to accept the permit fee.
How much is the permit fee?
I believe it's around 300.
I was going to say about 350, I think.
Correct.
There's an initial permit fee, and then there's a renewal fee. The renewal, I think, is about 350, if I'm...
Okay. Much less than a day's work for many lots.
But one of the recommendations that Finance has is to amend the Los Angeles Municipal Code that would provide for the authority for CID to deny the renewal of a police permit if a taxpayer is delinquent.
And that's what we want to do with this committee and this report, is to plug every single hole and make that so tight that they won't be able to find another escape route, and that they will be boxed in, and there'll be consequences if they don't pay. Consequences, as we discussed, like chaining it. We discussed that prior to this. If we put a chain there, a padlock, well, to me, a K-rail is a whole lot more effective, and to send a message out that we're tired of people stealing the money for the taxpayers. The denial, new permit, so we have to plug that up. And the parking network, how credible and how reputable, and when does that contract, how does that contract do with the parking network?
Well, the Office of Finance has contracted the parking network dating back to March of 2004. The parking network is an established expert in the field. They have extensive experience in the industry. They were highly involved in the compliance and enforcement of the City of Miami's parking occupancy tax. They've been involved with other cities as well. As I said, we've been involved with the contract with the parking network dating back to 2004. During that time period, the parking network's efforts have produced approximately $8.1 million in additional parking occupancy tax collections, and they've conduct audits as well as discovery work for us. They not only provide us complementary work to this work that our staff auditors do, but they also provide additional services which our staff auditors do not have the expertise to do in terms of the actual on-site investigation, the surveillance, the car counting. That is not a area of expertise that our auditors have. They're highly involved in financial auditing and examination of financial records. The parking network goes a step above that with their actual on-site investigations, using their experience and knowledge of the field. So they've been extremely valuable to the Office of Finance efforts and the city's efforts in enforcement and collection of POT.
And what does that cost us a year?
Since the inception of the contract, as I've indicated, they assisted in the collection of an additional $8.1 million, and that resulted in a total compensation of $2.2 million. I would say that their compensation is based on collections. In other words, it's a contingency fee. If there aren't any collections, then the parking network does not get paid. So they will be paid out of the additional parking occupancy tax revenue that is not only identified, but also collected.
So there's an incentive for them. In other words, just not they're getting this money for going out there and doing the inspection. They need to turn the results that prove true in order to get.
That's correct.
That's a good way to do it. Gives them a great incentive to go out there and work versus not be so aggressive. Let's go to the city attorney's office. Beverly. And Pijman.
Unfortunately, Pijman sent me Beverly Cook, Assistant City Attorney.
Hey, Beverly, we spoke about this before, and obviously we had that news conference this morning with our city attorney, our controller. I know that you're probably frustrated with the way that the situation is bogged down with the shenanigans that the lot people play on you as a litigator. The successful civil lawsuits against Prestige and the pending litigation against parking scaffolds, Can you go into some of that detail?
Certainly. We have 30 pending parking cases against parking operators. 21 of them are pending, 7 have been settled, and 2 filed bankruptcy, and so we're actively followed them into the bankruptcy court and are fighting them there as well. We did have a major victory against one of them, Prestige Parking. We received a judgment of $4.4 million. So we have received total judgment both on the criminal side and civil side exceeding $5 million against that particular entity. One of the difficulties is, as you mentioned, is collecting and trying to enforce those judgments. And our office has become very aggressive, even more so, where we will record judgment liens, abstract of judgments against any assets that we can find, bank accounts, anything that is of value. But as some of the prior folks have testified, one of the things that they do is immediately change names. And you have individuals who owe the city money, and they all of a sudden own no assets. They lease their home, they lease their vehicles, they have no real business interest that we have to go after. So they attempt to try and be one step ahead, filing bankruptcy, transferring assets, leasing property, and so it becomes very difficult to try and capture them. But we have been fairly aggressive in our efforts to locate assets. We have some investigators on board with us to try and locate those assets and attempt to enforce our judgments against them.
And these are millions of dollars that these people have absconded with.
That's correct.
So that obviously has to be plugged. And I think we have some solutions for that, too. Let's ask for the controller now. The controller's representative?
Could I just
Sure,
make
go ahead.
one
Go ahead.
statement, please? With regard to the valets,
Yes.
they are subject to the city's POT. We attempt to collect, and they are part of our number of folks that we're going after. What we don't have is the regulatory part in place to require them to have any type of permit. But they're subject to our parking occupancy tax ordinance, and we certainly go after them and will file lawsuits against them.
But that'd be pretty hard to prove if we don't have all the ducks in order.
That's correct. It's a fluid business,
Yeah.
and you generally speaking, they're out there at night or on weekends. That's when they're most viable, and so you'd have to have someone like a parking network to be out there to provide us with information about them.
I know working at assignment as a reserve officer, Hollywood Division has a number of reserves that work the nightclubs, because they have a lot of nightclubs in Hollywood, and they go and they inspect the valets to make sure that they have whatever is required to have,
Right.
inspect the clubs, because they have a huge number of nightclubs now in Hollywood that are very active. But that's another thing, Mr. Tiefank, that we could look into is some training with the Los Angeles Police Department, training bulletin or something to the effect of what these lots have to do. Because oftentimes officers get calls there. I know last night there was a situation in the county at Whiskey Go-Go where they had a problem in a shooting, and sometimes you get out of control, and the officers who go there can do these inspections, which probably most of them don't even know about it right now.
Relevant to that, sir, we have trained Hollywood Division folks about
You
the
have?
requirement for a business registration tax certificate
Okay.
and the valet ordinance. Matter of fact, the valet ordinance effort started with problems in Hollywood.
Okay,
That's
good.
where it all began.
That's why they know out there.
Yes, that's
okay,
correct.
excellent. Okay, Controller's Office.
Ferris Safari with Controller's Office. City Controller recently, just this morning, issued a letter to your committee actually indicating her strong support in terms of any effort that would increase the tax collection. In fact, she has initiated an audit of tax collection procedures in the Office of Finance last summer. We had our meeting with the Office of Finance, and under the advice from City Attorney, we deferred that audit until the pending litigations are resolved. Once we have that situation taken care of, we are back in the Office of Finance. We look at the policies, procedures in terms of identifying taxpayers, procedures used in collecting these taxes due from them, in making sure that resources are prioritized and used in the best, most efficient way in terms of increasing revenues, efforts that they are using in terms of collecting from these deficient or delinquent taxpayers. We're also going to do some sort of benchmarking practices in terms of what other jurisdictions or cities are doing in terms of collecting parking taxes and how we can learn from their experience and what we can improve in our process. The idea is, as you mentioned, that there are loopholes in terms of these parking operators not to pay taxes. Our intention is to identify ways that we can close those loopholes and improve the process efficiencies.
And the thing is, they're collecting the dollars, and they're not giving it to us.
That's
And when
correct.
someone comes in to park, they collect that money, and they're just pocketing the money. It's not like we're charging extra. The patrons are paying that, not knowing where it goes, and the people running the lots, hey, here's extra money for us, which to me is outrageous.
That's exactly stealing cities' fund.
Yeah, exactly. They collect for us and supposed to pay us, but like sales tax, if a business was collecting sales tax and they don't turn the sales tax. So normally when there's a register, they can tabulate that, they can find out, they can do audit. But when you're dealing with a cash business, this is basically a cash cow for them. I'll put $2 in and I'll take $3 out. That's a huge issue, and $23 million is a whole lot of money. But what we hope to do with this committee and working with the controller is to plug every single loophole. And I know the controller has the ability to do audits and audits and audits and audits and audits, but there's really no follow-up unless the council takes action and does something with it.
That's correct.
So all the wonderful audits that are done, all the time that's spent, and if we don't take action on it, it goes nowhere. And I can assure you that we're going to take action on all of them. And there's
great.
38 audits that are sitting right now collecting dust that have been completed where no action's been taken. We will correct that. But this, obviously, when we're looking for dollars to keep the city running, is a huge, huge issue. I thank you, and I'm going to give it opportunity to my colleague, and then I'll go into the public comment cards.
I was
Parks.
just going to ask, is something from finance or who would be appropriate? I thought, from going back, that this electronic equipment was already installed. I thought that was one of the recommendations, and that this, what do we call it, revenue control equipment.
No, there was a prior motion, I believe, by, at the time, Councilmember Wendy Gruhl. At that time, what the discussions resulted in between Office of Finance and City Attorney and CID was a recommendation for the implementation of a ticketing process. We believe that that is not satisfactory, as has been indicated in several statements today. A ticketing process.
Is it in place?
No, that's not. No, a ticketing process can be easily manipulated, and we have had discussions with the City of San Francisco. The City of San Francisco does require all parking lot operators to install revenue control equipment at their own expense, and that is a recommendation that the Office of Finance would be making for those parking lot operators that have had their police permit revoked.
Okay, then, the thing, again, going back a ways, I thought when the proposal was made that it was on its way to being implemented, and then we've had an internal committee that decided to do a ticketing instead of the equipment, and then we didn't do the ticketing, and so we're, 3 years or 4 years later, and we got the same problem. Who's responsible for causing them to put the equipment in?
Well, that would be a regulatory requirement. That would not be a requirement that the Office of Finance could mandate.
Who is responsible?
The regulatory agency is CID, the Commission Investigation Division.
Let me ask Mr. Tife, because one thing I think that, when you look at these different department functions, if everybody walks up to the line, we don't quite get anything done because it falls right through the crack between the two departments.
Councilmember, there's no current requirement within the ordinance to install the equipment. If there was a requirement, then we would be the regulatory entity for that to ensure the equipment is installed as part of the permit being issued. But currently, the ordinance does not require that.
So what do we need? We need to amend the ordinance?
Yes, sir.
To make that a requirement?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Can we do that as the city attorney, recommend the city attorney amend that ordinance to make it a requirement of the equipment, and that police commission, investigation division would be the enforcement?
Right, sir. What if the
Would
The
be
way-
part of your permit
Right.
process?
That's how I envision it, sir, is that you're going to have a lot that part of, and it's, let's just say it's a clean lot. There's not operated before. It's zoned appropriately, et cetera. Part of your application process is you would come in with whatever the installation of that equipment would be required under the ordinance, the type of equipment, et cetera, to meet the needs. And that would be part of the permitting
And what
requirement.
would we do retroactively to existing?
I believe that would be something that council would have to consider as far as a policy matter as to the current lots that are in operation that do not currently have any regulatory equipment, as to how you would look at doing those. I think our effort was going to be in conversations first for those lots that have been delinquent in payment of their POT, that they would be the first entities to go to.
Okay. But now, even, because one of the things I think on some of these cash money businesses, you don't quite know if they're paying it all until you audit it.
That's correct, sir.
So one of the things I'm just wondering in that ordinance, whether we not just take a slice and say for new businesses, but we also create that either through the renewal process or in some fashion giving you the authority to cause existing businesses to basically implement these requirements, because it's all at their expense. It's not an expense to the city or the police department. It's a matter of making it a requirement and imposing it.
To me, that it would seem the steps to take would be for new businesses coming in to operate, they would have to install the equipment. If there's a transfer in ownership of a parking lot, then they would have to do that. I think as to the other businesses, if we were going to do it on a renewal basis, all permits are renewed on January 1.
I mean, annually?
Annually, yes. All permits are renewed annually, January 1, sir.
Okay. So if we could ask the city attorney to work with the police department in creating amendment to the ordinance that if we look at the renewal process as one phase, new lots as one, and then what was the third?
Change of ownership, sir.
Change of ownership. So between those three, we'd capture all the lots.
Yes, sir.
In a very short time.
Councilmember Parks, if I could also add two things. Number one, if Office of Finance could be added to your instructions to work with CID and the city attorney in drafting of the ordinance. And number two, I think it is important to require that existing businesses that have had their police permit revoked also included in the mandate that they have to install revenue control equipment. If those existing businesses that are not in compliance, that are delinquent after they've had their administrative appeal process with the Office of Finance as well as their revocation hearing with CID, if they're not included, then they would escape enforcement, and these are the operators that we definitely need to bring into compliance.
We better understand if they're revoked, are they still doing business?
No, sir, they should not be doing business, but they could have received a suspension or a revocation and then paid their monies that they owe. And I think the piece that Mr. Cabrera is talking about is if they're going to be reinstated as an operator, they would have to put the equipment in.
Would reinstatement be viewed as a new or renewal?
It would be a conditional reinstatement.
What, a renewal?
They could be revoked or reinstated with their original permit, but we could put conditions on that. A condition be that you be no more than 60 days in arrears of your payment of POT. All types of conditions we can put on a permit.
So the reinstatements also should be a part of it.
Right.
Get finance and police and city attorney?
Right. And the last thing that I would add to that is, as another condition for reinstatement, it obviously would be that the delinquent operator be required to resolve and pay their outstanding tax liability.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay, so what do we project? Is the city attorney here?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Let me just ask, what do we
Beverly?
project in being able to amend that ordinance? Is that?
Certainly, and I will work with our general counsel who reports to CID and work with him, I would guess, in several months. We've talked about some of these changes already, so I will talk to Brian and get him on board, and we'll begin that process.
Just keep thinking, when you say they renew it once a year, is it set like January?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay, so if we can make this to be implemented by January 1st, 2012, we can start off with a slate, having all renewals with that equipment.
Certainly.
Well, we're going to further discuss that part. We have a couple public speakers. Bob Hindle, Mr. Spiker, and I don't know who the third gentleman is. Who's going to sit on Mr. Spiker's lap?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilman Parks,
Who identify?
Ken Spiker. I'm the executive director of the LA City Parking Association. 9 years ago, my association then asked me and my president, Bob Hindle, to go see Laura Chick and lay out the problems that we're having with exactly what you've been discussing 9 years ago. We talked Ms. Chick into hiring the consultant and doing the actual. The only way it works is to do the stings and actually count how many vehicles go into the parking lot during the day. And they have done so. So the $8 million, the Parking Association in LA is the ones that initiated that. But that's not really, and the machines are not going to solve the problem. The problem is that, as in Prestige Parking, they've got a $4 or $5 million judgment against them. They're not going to collect a dime. They have their sons operating over 30 parking lots in the city right now, the owner's son. And it's just going to keep going until you put it into the ordinance, as we did in the wallscape problems in the city of Los Angeles, that you have the property owner on the hook. When you have a property owner knowing that he's going to pay, if he hires one of these shoddy outfits that isn't going to pay, now you got some real teeth. What we're talking about here is not going to solve the problem. All you're going to do is parking's going to go up higher, just like in San Francisco. They're not happy. Talk to the people, and these parking machines are extremely expensive, and they're a pain, and they don't always work, and it doesn't solve the problem. But every parking lot in this city, we operate 75% of all the parking lots in the city. We've been audited by everybody. Not one of my clients has ever had a problem. So that's 25% that's causing all the problems. But if you make the property owner responsible when they sign that agreement to operate your parking lot, and now he is responsible for deficiencies to the city, now you got some teeth. This ordinance hasn't been touched, Councilman, in 60 years. It needs to be redone. It's so antiquated, and it's not just this portion of it. But you should bring, as Mr. Chief, you should bring the valet portion. They are not regulated. It's out of control in the city of LA. But the Restaurant Association is going to fight you. That's what stopped this.
They can fight us all they want. It reminds me of the bandit taxi cabs. The bandit taxi cabs.
I hear you. And we need this kind of leadership because it is out of control.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Councilman Zine and
Don't get
Councilman
Mr. Spiker too upset.
Parks. Yeah, he stole some of my thunder here, but
He doesn't have much thunder left.
And he also gave me the wrong title. I'm chairman of the Los Angeles Parking Association, which is a voluntary position. And then
I think he referred to you as president.
That's correct. And
If he doesn't do a good job, he's going.
and in the real world, I'm the vice president with Parking Concepts, which is. We are a city contractor. We have several city contracts and a couple of hundred other commercial accounts. Listening to some of the comments here today, I would just like to add some information. Some is my opinion. My associate here, Richard Raskin, also with Parking Concepts, has a 10-year history with Walker Parking Consultants, primarily representing municipalities, so he may be able to contribute to this also. But you were talking earlier about the revenue that's generated on a surface parking lot. Surface parking lots, in my opinion, are probably 80 to 90% cash. Commercial office buildings, these sexy high-rise buildings, they're probably 10 to 20% cash. So there's a huge difference between the turnover transient parking lot around Staples and Hollywood that you're talking about as to the regular commercial operation, a substantial difference. The issue of requiring an operator to install revenue control equipment. That's kind of a generic definition for a lot of different types of equipment. It's very expensive. I can visualize the permitting process. Most of that equipment is electrical. It's going to require permitting, trenching, a lot of different challenges to get through the process. And I don't think it's fair to penalize the bulk of the operators that are legitimate and report in good faith and want to do their part in a responsible manner, to penalize everybody for a few of the individuals that continually violate the process and operate in a improper manner. I would support the prospect of requiring the repeat offenders, requiring that group to utilize a revenue control equipment or some type of system that mandates that tickets be issued and that documentation be retained and recorded. But I think that should be reserved for the scofflaws that are repeat offenders and have demonstrate a history of not complying.
What about those lots where you drive in and there's a box and you parked in 102 and you put the money into 102? How do they coordinate that?
Well, those are typically, if they're, we call that an honor park, and you're kind of relying on the customer to pay his $2 or $5 in a slot box.
Right.
That's quite antiquated, but there are still some of them around. And from an operator's perspective, it's kind of better than nothing, if you will.
How they collect that and then the tax comes out of that?
Absolutely. We have some of those operations. We have one in Venice Beach. Normally our lots in Venice, the city lot, as a matter of fact, it's staffed most of the time. But for after hours and early morning hours when it doesn't justify staffing, we have this slot box that is there for the public to use.
And if they don't pay, what happens?
Well, when the lot is checked, and that money goes into a little slot by each stall, when the supervisor checks that lot, checks the box, and there's a car in a stall and there's no money in the corresponding slot, normally we'll issue a warning and we will record the warning, and the third time we threaten to tow. We rarely tow cars. That's bad PR, and it's a real exception. We have a soft enforcement. Like I said, it's an honor pay situation, and it's really allows us to generate some revenue for the city when the lot is not staffed. But it's not significant. It's not a big dollar item. But that revenue is declared and the tax is paid. The revenue is recorded every day. The money is deposited every day, 7 days a week. Now those are the city contracts. They require that.
Okay, sir, you had some comments?
Yes. You had talked.
Who are you? Identify.
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Richard Raskin. I'm Director of Operations for Parking Concepts. And I just wanted to add some background information about some of the things that were being discussed here today. I think you had mentioned a few times about tickets being reused. One of the dangers in the parking industry as a whole is that it's the third largest cash industry in the country.
What's the first and second?
First and second are drugs and casinos, both of which have very effective ways of dealing with people that subvert funds. The parking world does not. And a good portion of the parking industry is populated, and that's my boss, so I'm going to say I'm not including myself, but it's populated by people that are poorly paid. They're minimum wage plus 50 cents. And these people are typically entrusted with hundreds, if not thousands of dollars that they collect in the course of a shift. And it is not a very far leap for someone who has just been written up for attendance or threatened that they're about to lose their job to figure out a way to reuse a ticket a couple of times to add to their salary, so to speak. So a good portion of the components to a poorly run operation are actually at the surface level. The owners or the operators' employees are taking from them. This cuts into the operator's profit tremendously, so it's not something they encourage. And to the best of what I know, it's never part of an operator's practice to reuse tickets. That's an individual who's figured out that his own management is not watching him. Doesn't change the fact that the city is not getting the tax revenue, but it requires an operator to be more vigilant. The city needs to be more vigilant over the operators. And what I'm going to suggest has worked for me many times when I was a consultant and I helped other cities with their parking difficulties.
Go ahead.
Okay. When my brother and I were growing up, I did a little bit better in school than he did. My parents were very exasperated by my brother's lack of attention, and they kept insisting that he needed to study and do his homework, and he kept saying he did. So finally my mother went into the bedroom and sat down next to him and watched him do his homework. and she did this for several nights, and all of a sudden his grades went up. So what I'm suggesting is that your auditors, whether it's the parking network or people working with the city, go into a lot that is circumspect as best as to how it's operating, and just shadow the operators, shadow the cashiers, sit in the booth with a clipboard and write down every transaction that happens, what time the ticket was collected, how much was collected, and then compare the results from that day to any previous day, and that'll give you your benchmark, what that operator is generally and typically making, because when you've got an auditor in the booth, you're going to do the things the right way, and that will give you an idea of the scope of the problem. It might be even more substantial than your auditors are already thinking it is. So that's one of my suggestions. Well, that is my suggestion right now.
Okay. For the association, you indicated that the parking lot cheats impact your business, put you at an unfair competitive disadvantage. What recommendations do you have for the city to target the bad actors without putting additional burden on those operators that are following the rules?
Well, this was mentioned earlier, and I think the number one item is if the city attorney or whatever legal process is necessary to hold the property owner, the landowner, is ultimately responsible for the payment of that tax if the operator.
What happens when a 90-year-old lady owns the land, and it's a family tradition, she doesn't work, she gets paid from that lot, it's leased out to a company that's ripping off the system wild. She has no idea, but she collects the rent once a month. That's my concern, is that if the person who is operating the lot is the owner of the lot versus some other individual who owns the lot that's leasing it to another company, the company's ripping them off. It's just like in the water and power right now, we got a situation where water and power bills aren't being paid by certain people, and they're going after the property owner. The property owner says, I rented this, I leased this to a business, the business folded after 4 months or 5 months, they skipped out on me, and they owe this bill, now their water and power is coming after me to pay the bill. I'm trying to figure out how we hold that landowner responsible when, in good faith, they lease the property to this individual who's running a parking lot, who's ripping off the system, and the person on the other side of the coin says, hey, you know, you're coming after me now. What did I do? Except try and lease my property out as a parking lot. That's the mix.
That's a very, very good point. I would say, however,
tough luck.
The 90-year-old lady or whomever, or their estate, or whoever's in charge of that property should understand what their liability, what their exposure is. It's like having an operator on there with no insurance. What if something happens? Yeah. Some of these fly-by-night operators don't have insurance. They hire people off the street. They shouldn't be working in the first place. They pay them cash out of the receipts.
Yeah.
There's no work comp tax being paid or insurance being paid.
There's a multitude of problems. We're just trying to find out how we plug this. And one of the suggestions I have, which I'm going to do in the recommendation on the follow-up, is a bond. If you're a bad player, we're going to require a bond when you get your permit renewed, if we're going to renew your permit, and that bond, we can then seize the bond. That I've got a problem going after that landlord, just like the water and power bill. You own a commercial property, and you lease it to some company who signs a 3-year lease. They're there 6 months, business is sour, they leave. You get stuck with the water and power bill, the lights, the air conditioning, $1,000, and they skipped out on you on the rent. Now you're got the water and power company down your throat for the bill, and you're still making the mortgage and you don't have a tenant, which has happened to a lot of commercial people. That's one of the problems.
That's a
then you're going to file
point.
Bankruptcy because now you can't afford to do it.
My comment had to do with what would be effective, and that
would be effective.
But that was the same rationale with the wallscapes, Mr. Chair. They said the same thing. Some of the building owners don't live in the city. Some of them they're owned by corporations outside the country. That's not an excuse. You have to do some due diligence when you're going to hire a subcontractor to operate on your building or to run your parking lot.
That'd be the concept.
And I think a bond would be great as well. But
if I drive your car and I don't have a driver's license, and I get stopped, and that car gets impounded, you let me drive that car, knowing or not knowing I didn't have a driver's license, unlicensed driver, and they
Well,
can
I
impound
mean,
the car.
that-
Now, your
that's-
car's in hock. You got to go down and claim it and pay the fee.
I mean,
That's
that,
basically what we're talking about.
that's what's going on with, and Richard will back up on this, on the valets. You don't even know if these people have driver's licenses
whole nother-
or insurance,
That's a whole nother.
but it should be in the ordinance.
Well, that's a whole nother issue, and.
Would you allow us to have some stake in this ordinance so we could?
No. Mr. Smith brought to my attention that this master valet police commission permit would require contract between the valet business parking lot operators. I mean, this was done in 1999. I mean, we got the thing right here, the file number, but unfortunately, nothing's been done with it. The paperwork here is here. So what you're saying is already moving forward. We need to push it because somehow it's sitting lingering, but it's already been.
No, I know, we worked on it. It's been in the city attorney's office for years.
That's what I'm saying. We need to have, what we will do is bring this back to this committee in a time certain, so we don't have to let it sit and wait and collect more dust, because everything you're advocating has already been done. It just hasn't moved through the process. So what I'm going to, you have any closing comments before I make some recommendations? So the recommendations for this: request the city attorney to draft language to amend the LA Municipal Code to authorize the denial of a business police permit application for a new permit for non-payment of business tax and our parking and occupancy tax. So if they haven't paid their tax, they're not getting a new permit. They're not going to be able to change the name from one son to the other. If they're delinquent, they're delinquent. You can't renew the permit. Request city attorney to draft language to amend the Los Angeles Municipal Code to authorize the denial of a business annual police permit renewal for non-payment of business tax or parking and occupancy tax. Request city attorney to draft language to amend the Los Angeles Municipal Code to authorize that prior to reinstatement of a parking lot operator's revoked or suspended police permit, permit holder be required to pay all outstanding delinquent business tax and parking occupancy tax, to install at the permit holder's expense automated and approved revenue control equipment at each parking lot location that has had a police permit revoked or suspended, which takes care of the bad folks, but not the good folks who are complying with the rules. Request city attorney to work with the Office of Finance to report back on the legal possibilities of requiring all parking lot operators to obtain a bond for each location to satisfy any delinquent tax similar to the regulation in San Francisco, in addition to possibly of obtaining a lien on the property for non-payment of their parking occupancy tax, and instruct the police commission general counsel to provide a status report on the valet parking ordinance and how it can incorporate the above recommendations in the valet that you're talking about. So what we're trying to do is find best practice that we can move forward with to have a consolidated package. And for Mr. T-Fank, they've trained officers in Hollywood. We would request that training to go with the police department. For example, bandit cabs, officers now know if they don't have a seal on the side, it's a bandit cab. You can stop it if they're picking up someone in the city. Like, most people don't even know what a bandit cab looks like, or they have to have a city seal. Education for law enforcement is important. And once we start generating some interest in this, then I think we can start seeing some positive impact in the revenues that are generated as far as the people who are trying to skirt the law. And for the city attorney that's going after these people, we're not going to settle for 10 cents on a dollar, because what they'll do is lack up all these fees, and then they'll say, okay, we'll pay you 10 cents on a dollar. And then the city says, oh, great, we're getting some money. No, if they owe us $4 million, they owe us $4 million. But we need to tighten it and be effective with what we're doing in order to be effective and bring in this dollars that are basically, they're collecting our tax and not giving it to us. But if there anything else that we want to plug into this, I'd ask Finance, Commission, Controller, anything else we want to plug into this and make this a concise package as we move forward. So if there's anything else that we haven't addressed, and then we'll.
I think you'll get into this when you do the detail of doing the draft, but as far as a delinquent operator and the taxes, he should have to pay the back taxes.
Yes.
Penalties and assessments should also be a part of that.
Well, I called everybody with a comment card, so we'll do that. But what we want to do is, from the city attorney, is there anything that you would recommend that hasn't been addressed as far as plugging the information? Since you're the one going after these people.
No, I believe that all of these suggestions, and we are looking into whether or not we can hold the property owner liable. I believe Mr. Spiker and his group have provided us with information from the city of Miami. We're reviewing that. We downloaded the information from the city of San Francisco with regard to bonds. So we have a head of steam, and anything else that we can find, we certainly will pursue.
What I
We have
want to throw in everything you
Absolutely.
can find. I understand San Francisco, the parking tax is 25%.
Right.
Here it's 10%, and they're at 25%. So it's not that it's an unreasonable amount of money. And does anybody know when that parking tax went into effect?
I saw some information that indicated 2010. Ed, I don't know if you know.
No, that tax has been around before 2010.
Right, exactly. But some of the enhancements that they have added in terms of the automated system, they have a $500 fee.
Establishing that tax on the parking lots.
Oh, I don't know when they
Do
increased
you know
it.
finance?
About
Ed?
15 years ago.
15 years ago?
That's an estimate.
About 15 years ago? So
Yes,
it's nothing new.
Yes, I believe it was approximately 1992.
And we can't raise that because of 218.
218, right.
So we can't go to a higher level because of the current restrictions. The voters aren't going to support that. We can't even collect what we're supposed to get, leave alone jack it
Yeah.
up.
We can always increase it, but it would require voter approval.
Yeah, which obviously is not the time to do that. So, and we'll hear from, and I apologize, Ron Galper, and I didn't see a card from you, and I didn't know what your purpose here was, but thank you for being here.
My
From
purpose
court.
was to observe, actually, we're in the process of completing a report on this subject as well,
Okay.
which will be forthcoming.
We appreciate that. So what we want to do is we want to put an ordinance into place and modify it with all the different components. And that's why I ask if there's anyone here from the different entities that we have, Police Commission, Finance, Controller's Office, City Attorney's Office, and I leave the discretion of City Attorney's Office. Anything else you find that will fit this mix, we will go and move forward. And hopefully we can get that done in a short period of time to come back to this committee. So we'll hold this in this committee. Pardon me?
Has to go to council to approve these recommendations.
Well, to approve these, but what about,
It'll come back here.
okay, then I'll come back here. All right. Mr. Parks.
You know, the only thing I'd recommend is that if we talk about the revenue equipment only on those that are
Delinquent.
revoked. I mean,
Or
we don't-
delinquent,
Well, they didn't say delinquent, they said revoked.
revoked.
That's the very end of the system, that somebody's played the system for months and years to get revoked. I think there's got to be a middle ground as to where that equipment to keep people from going.
Maybe late on their fees. I mean, I don't want to jeopardize the legitimate folks, which I understand their concern, but at the same time, if we can come up with some, city attorney, if you can find some compromise in between those that are delinquent versus pre-delinquent, where we could apply that, but I don't know if it's fair to give it to everybody who's following the rules.
May not be to everyone, but it's something for, to the side of waiting till you're in a revocation. That's the extreme.
Well, before revocation.
I mean, but you got to come up with something that.
Delinquent on payment?
With something, I think that we have to figure out, because I think everybody in the business will say they do it right.
Well,
If I could just comment on that, I think being delinquent doesn't necessarily mean that tax is due. Mistakes are made by everybody, by both sides, and
what if you're delinquent more than so many times? In other words, to give them an opportunity, if they're delinquent 3, 4 times, whatever, and I don't like to give people a break when they know they're supposed to pay something, like your taxes are due April 15th, but this year, April 18th. If your taxes aren't due, bam, you're going to get slammed. If we did something that was reasonable, and I understand Mr. Park's concern, because what we have now is you're over the top, and now we're going to come in and put the sanctions on you. He wants to do it before you get to that point, but at the same time, there's concern we don't jeopardize the folks that are doing everything right.
I think as long as there was some fair and reasonable process, due process for the operator, that would be fine.
But I think it's the same concept as what you mentioned earlier. The best way to determine what the real money is have an auditor sit there. Well, that's the same thing with the equipment, is that if you have the equipment there, you may find amazingly that you're making more money than you thought you were making. So the issue is waiting for the revocation, in my judgment, is way past. There's got to be a middle ground of saying, you know, whether it's delinquency. The other thing I think we have to think about is that, is the fact that this equipment, if it's expensive and it takes some time to put it in, I don't think it could be done on somebody's 1 month late. I think it's got to be something that's more definitive. maybe the police department may have a middle ground, an idea being that they're dealing with this.
So you're agreeable to a middle ground?
Yeah.
Okay. So, Mr. Gife?
Yes, sir. I think the key purpose of all of this is to ensure we get our money. If the bonding mechanism or a property mechanism can come about, that ensures we get our money. So I think that becomes the easy piece to get into place quicker for the new operators that are going to come into place. I think that, in prior conversation with Mr. Hindle, and I know from looking at the past equipment, there's a tremendous amount of equipment out there in the field to look at. The cost of putting the equipment in, as Mr. Hindle said, the trenching, the electricals, all has to go in. That becomes, even if we pass an ordinance, to get all that done takes a much longer period of time. If we can get an ordinance that allows for the bonding piece for all new operators coming in, or all operators that have had a revocation or a suspension, that to me gets us the quick fix to ensure we're going to get our revenues. Then the next piece is, how do we ensure the revenues that we're getting are the accurate revenues? And I think then we need to maybe take some small steps to get us to a place and not try and do it all at one time. And clearly, I think if we can sit down with all the city players, and I would suggest that based on our past discussions with the association, that we include the association. They have a lot of expertise that we do not have at a staff level. And I think talking with them, as we have in other cases, has been very beneficial, and would just suggest that we look at that and come back with a report to the committee that would look at all of these issues and give you some real sense of what we're talking about.
Let me ask you on the lien issue, how does that work if you have a person that's leasing or renting the lot?
I don't know, sir. Again, those are for the lawyers. To me, the bonding piece seems to be the easiest and the best.
And the
but
bonding
again,
would be the person that gets the permit.
absolutely.
They'd have to post that bond, and it has
Yes,
to be a
sir.
substantial bond, and then we would pull that bond. We'd collect, kind of like on bail. If you
Yes.
jump bail,
Right.
we pull the bail bond. At least that way, we've got some opportunity to collect something. At the same time, I'm not opposed to having the landowner be held responsible too, but I think the more opportunities we have to collect and the more onus, then it seems that the better play to have them be honest and pay those taxes. And I think the more training for our police officers, not that we're going to make them tax collectors, even though you go to Italy, and in Italy, they have the tax police, and the tax police are armed people who go out and collect the taxes. And they don't have people who are going to play games with them. They're
Again,
very aggressive collecting in Italy.
What we
don't
have-
much aggressiveness over here.
what we have done with the Central Bureau and other entities throughout the city that have heavy parking lots, we have trained them. We work task forces with them during SC games at the Coliseum, other events. We work task forces with the respective areas to ensure that there are not lots that are popping up in front lawns and they're charging people. We go out and do those. We do during the NBA playoff time at Staples. We're down there aggressively working with the local area again. So we have outreached, and it's not that we have not done anything. Most of the areas know that if they go to a parking lot, they have to have a permit. If they don't have a permit, they know what to do.
So if you're parking 20 cars on your front lawn, your back lawn,
You're in trouble. You have no permit, and you get shut
Can't do
down.
that.
Cannot do that, sir.
so anyone who owns a parking lot has to have a permit issued
Absolutely.
by the police commission.
That's correct, sir.
But at
If you're
least
taking
we'll-
money.
We'll tie together between finance and permit and city attorney, and those people who want to run a lot will run it in a legitimate fashion, and if they don't, then there'll be some consequences. So we think that all of the gaps are now filled.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Parks,
No, I think that's fine. We come back with all the recommendations.
anything else in closure?
Ed Cabrera, Office of Finance. I just want to clarify that Finance's recommendation with regards to the mandate of a bond requirement, that be applicable to all parking lot operators, not just new operators, but that be applicable to all operators. And obviously, we will have further discussions with City Attorney and CID. One other item, if you may, you've asked for other potential recommendations, and I would just put out there that an additional requirement that the City of San Francisco has with regards to the revenue control equipment is that they also mandate a $500 inspection fee, and that would be utilized by the City of San Francisco to offset any costs that they incur in inspecting and ensuring that the revenue control equipment is the appropriate equipment to suit the requirements of the ordinance. So that's something else that should be considered by city attorney in their review.
Well, I think cost recovery, I would like to say cost recovery. I don't know about assessing it at $500, but I would think that saying cost recovery, those lots that have to have that equipment there'd be a cost recovery for the inspections done by the city.
Correct.
Not that every lot would have to pay that, but just those that have proven not to be good business folks. Mr. Spiker?
Thank you.
If you make us bond every lot, again, 75% are run by the association that has never had one issue with finance. But look at what it's going to do to the parking fees. It's a fortune. Bob is one of the smaller companies, and he operates 50 lots in the city of LA. That's 50 bonds,
How much is a bond?
about 3% of whatever your bond is. What's the bond going to be?
I don't know. All I
But
know is-
you're banging the good guys,
No,
Councilman.
I'm not saying the good guys.
Yeah, you are.
If the good guys took care of the bad guys, we wouldn't be in this boat. If the good guys.
We went to
bad guys-
we went to the city controller. We're the ones that initiated this, and now we're getting hit.
No, you're not getting hit. There's a million recommendations to bring in $23 million, and God knows how much more is out there for the bad guys. It's just like the taxi industry. You got the good guys who are now assessing themselves to go after the bad guys because they're assessing themselves to give the money to the police department to go out and investigate and take those bad guys to jail. Someone's got to do it. Now, I'm not going to hurt the good guys, but I'm saying that we have too many that are skirting the law and playing the game.
I agree.
Changing the
I
family
agree.
and changing the name. Like the one that we were at today, they just put SC in front of it to change the name to go get another permit. Mr. Tiefenk doesn't know what finance has, so what we have is a situation that falls through the loop.
Okay,
And
I
$23
just
million
wanted you to think about it. It's we got an awful lot of lots. That's a lot of bonds. That's a lot of money.
Well, I empathize with that, but at the same time, I want to make sure that they're held accountable for what they need to do. And there may be an option other than those that they have to put something. Something.
We'll talk.
I
We'll
mean,
talk.
You've got to make sure that the situation doesn't continue.
This has been great because it's long overdue. We're ready. We need the help. We really appreciate it.
All right. So
Thank you.
Park supports, I approve, and away it goes. We have one item, number one. Mr. Clerk, number one, please.
Item number 1 is a communication from the City Council President relative to the appointment of Mr. Freddie A. Carrillo to the Quality and Productivity Commission. This item is scheduled for council tomorrow on April 13th, 2011.
Step forward, please. Mr. Freddie Carrillo.
Good evening, council members. I apologize for the delay. I was stuck in traffic at Ventura County.
Now, you know what I go through every single day.
Yeah, I feel your pain.
It's not bad.
No.
Miserable. So, Freddie, you were a neighborhood council, just a little information about yourself and why you're qualified for this position.
All right. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, and I've been a stakeholder for the past 18 years in Canoga Park, and I've been a board member for the past 5 years. I was a president for about 2.5 years. I currently work for the city of Moore Park as a city planner, and I'm working on my master's in public administration at Cal State Northridge.
So you're a Valley person, you know about the neighborhood council, you know about quality, you know how everybody get things done.
About
You heard
serving the community and the public.
You heard the discussion about parking lots and the problems we're having with that.
Yes, I did.
$23 million worth. Have you ever played in another arena of commission before, other than the neighborhood councils? Have you been on any other commissions or any other such activities?
No, I mean, I'm involved in other organizations in the community, but nothing that involves with the commissions or related to the city.
And with the quality and productivity, this committee, audits and government efficiency, huge issue. Audits, as you saw what happened with the parking lots, big dollars not being collected, and productivity and government efficiency, productivity, quality, it's all about the same thing, delivering the service to the people. So what this commission really has a lot of ability, and they haven't really done a whole lot as far as busting out of the box to say quality and productivity and what we can do to establish high quality for our employees and productivity of those employees to do the job that the taxpayers are paying for. And everybody says, well, we have this and we have that, we have a lot of issues, but the fact of the matter is taxpayers are still paying dollars and they expect a quality service by the employees that deliver that. So I know you personally, so I don't have any reservations. In fact, we're nominated you for this position.
Thank you, appreciate
to get you
it.
in a position of that, and the chief of staff was very supportive, Mr. Jimmy Blackman. But I think that you'll find that you can get that particular commission and shake it up and come forward to say, this is what we need to do on behalf of the taxpayers, the issues that the commission deals with. And basically, all departments are open to your review.
Yeah, no, actually, when this first was approached to me, I was very excited because I work for the city of Moore Park, like I said, and one of my first duties is to help the community, help the public, and by offering, acknowledging, their presence and somehow speeding the process, expediting the planning or any permits issues. I totally understand where it comes from when it comes in regards to serving the community, serving the public, and making sure that they, like you said, they are paying their taxes and deserve to be acknowledged and to be served the proper way.
Exactly. And you work in government, so you know.
Right, I do. I know and how it works and the system and what's it about. So, yeah, I'm very familiar with it.
There'll be a recommendation to move this forward. When is it in council tomorrow, you say?
Tomorrow.
Okay, be back here tomorrow?
Yes, I'm aware of that. It's been a speedy process, but, like I said, I'm very excited to join and be something more than the neighborhood council.
Yeah, it's an official qualified commission, so it gives you an opportunity to see the inside track of how things work.
Yes, I'm like I said, very excited.
Okay, wish you well.
Thank you very much.
All right, that'll be approved. Recommendation approved. And that concludes this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you very much.